There is a question most men ask in the wrong way. They ask, what do I need to do to make her choose me? They are looking for actions, behaviors, the right words at the right moment, the correct sequence of moves that tips the calculation in their favor. They are approaching the question like a competition, and they are trying to win it by outperforming the other competitors. This is the first error. And it is the error that guarantees most men lose before they have begun. Because the man who is focused on the competition is, by definition, defined by the competition. His direction is determined by what others are doing. His moves are responses to theirs. His identity in the context of this pursuit is relative. He is better than them or he is worse. He is ahead or he is behind. He exists in his own mind as a position in a ranking rather than as a fixed point with his own direction. And she can feel that, not as a conscious analysis, as a texture. The texture of a man whose orientation is outward and comparative rather than inward and directed. The texture of a man who is trying to win rather than simply being worth choosing. My name is Niccolò Machiavelli. I served the Republic of Florence for 14 years. I watched men compete for influence, for alliance, for the loyalty of people whose regard determined whether they rose or fell. And I observed, with a consistency that eventually stopped surprising me, that the men who competed most visibly almost always lost to the men who seemed not to be competing at all. Not because those men were indifferent. Not because they did not want what the others wanted. But because they had understood something the competitors had not. The choosing happens inside the person who is choosing. You do not control it. You cannot manipulate it into the outcome you want with sufficient cleverness or persistence or the correct sequence of behaviors. What you can do is become so clearly, so undeniably, so completely the obvious answer to what she is actually looking for that the choice makes itself. Those are completely different projects. And today we are going to go inside both of them until the difference is impossible to miss. I want to begin with what she is actually choosing between. Not men. Not the surface qualities of men. Not height or appearance or the specific things they say or the specific things they offer. She is choosing between signals. Every man she encounters sends a signal. Most of the time the signal is the same signal, wearing different clothes. The signal of a man who wants her regard. The signal of a man who is oriented toward her response. The signal of need, dressed up as confidence, dressed up as generosity, dressed up as humor, dressed up as strength. She has read this signal so many times that she recognizes it immediately, beneath any presentation. The specific words do not matter. The specific behaviors do not matter. What matters is the fundamental orientation of the man sending them. Is he pointed toward her? Or is he pointed toward something beyond her, and has chosen to include her in the trajectory? These two orientations produce completely different signals. And the difference between them is felt before it is understood. Before she has words for it. Before she has made any conscious assessment. The man oriented toward her is readable. His moves are predictable in the way that need is predictable. He will pursue. He will give. He will adjust his behavior in proportion to her response. He will be more present when she is warm and more anxious when she is cool. He is, in the language of the signal she is reading, a variable that she controls. The man oriented toward something beyond her is different. He is present when he is present and absent when he is absent, and the difference between those two states does not seem to be determined by her behavior. He has a direction that she did not create and cannot redirect. He is, in the language of the signal she is reading, a fixed point. And fixed points, in a world full of variables, are extraordinarily rare. Fixed points are what people move toward. Not because they are told to. Not because they decide to. Because the gravitational pull of genuine direction is one of the most compelling forces in human social experience. Machiavelli understood this about political power with a precision he applied everywhere. The prince who held his ground, who did not shift his position in proportion to the pressure applied to it, who remained oriented toward his own direction regardless of what others did, consistently attracted the loyalty that the pursuing prince consistently failed to secure. Not because holding ground is inherently virtuous, because it is the accurate expression of a man who has a center. And a man with a center is worth orienting toward. Now I want to go inside the psychology of what actually produces the choosing, because it is not what most men think. Most men believe that being chosen is primarily a function of what they offer. The better the offer, the more likely the choosing. And so they compete on offering. They try to be more attractive, more successful, more interesting, more attentive, more generous than the other men in her awareness. This is the wrong model. And the reason it is wrong is one of the most important things I observed across my entire career watching human beings pursue what they wanted. People do not choose what is best. They choose what they want. And wanting is not produced by quality of offering. Wanting is produced by the gap between what is present and what is not yet possessed. I wrote about this in the context of political power, but the principle is universal. Men are never fully satisfied. Nature has given them the capacity to desire everything but the ability to attain only some things. From this gap between desire and attainment, all of human behavior flows. The man who closes this gap too quickly, who makes himself too fully available, too fully known, too completely given, removes himself from the desire equation. He has answered every question before she had time to become curious about it. He has resolved every uncertainty before the uncertainty had time to produce wanting. And wanting, as we have established, requires the gap. This does not mean you should be cold. It does not mean you should be withholding. It does not mean you should manufacture artificial distance or perform unavailability you do not actually possess. It means you should be genuinely full, genuinely absorbed, genuinely pointed at something that has your real attention and your real energy and your real investment of self. A man like that naturally produces the gap, not because he is managing it, because he has a life that creates it. He is genuinely elsewhere sometimes. He is genuinely absorbed in his work sometimes. He is genuinely unavailable sometimes because genuine availability has a limit, and that limit is the edge of a life that is actually being lived. The gap that produces wanting is not manufactured. It is the natural shape of a full life intersecting with another full life. Two people, each with direction, each with genuine absorption in their own becoming, encountering each other in the space between their separate trajectories. That space is alive. It is charged with something real. And it does not close completely because it does not need to. Both people are still moving, still becoming, still pointed forward. She chooses the man who creates that kind of space, not because she has decided to, because she cannot stop thinking about him. And a person you cannot stop thinking about has already been chosen, whether the choosing has been announced or not. There is a quality I observed in every man who consistently attracted the loyalty and regard of others without appearing to pursue it. A quality that I eventually understood was not one quality but several, operating together in a way that produced a single unmistakable impression. I called it virtù, not goodness, not morality. The full, formidable development of a man's particular nature into something that commands genuine respect without demanding it. Let me describe what virtù looks like in the context we are discussing. Because it is not abstract. It is specific. It is readable. And it is buildable by any man willing to do the work. The first element is direction. A man with virtù knows where he is going. Not in the vague sense of having ambitions or hopes or things he would like to achieve someday. In the specific sense of having a project, a craft, a body of work, a standard he is building toward with enough seriousness that it actually organizes his daily life. This direction is visible without being announced. You can see it in how he spends his time. In what he talks about when he is genuinely engaged versus when he is performing engagement. In the quality of his attention when something genuinely interests him versus when he is going through the motions of interest. Direction produces gravity. People are drawn toward men who know where they are going because direction is rare and because the experience of being near someone with genuine direction is qualitatively different from the experience of being near someone who is drifting. She does not choose a man because he has direction. She finds herself moving toward him and discovers, in retrospect, that his direction was the thing pulling her. The second element is standards. A man with virtù has decided what he will and will not accept. In his work, in his relationships, in his own behavior. And these decisions are not negotiable in proportion to how much he wants something. Most men lower their standards when they want something badly enough. They compromise what they said they valued because the wanting has become strong enough to override the valuing. And this compromise, however invisible they believe it to be, is legible. She reads it as the signal that his standards were not real, that what he said he valued was a performance of values rather than an actual set of commitments. And a man whose values are negotiable is a man whose word cannot be trusted, including his word when he tells her she matters to him. The man who holds his standards when holding them costs him something is the man whose regard, when given, means something, because she has seen him withhold it when the conditions did not merit it. She knows, therefore, that his giving it is a genuine assessment rather than a strategy. The third element is composure. A man with virtù does not panic, not because nothing moves him, because he has cultivated the capacity to feel pressure without being reorganized by it. I spent my career in rooms where the pressure was extraordinary. Negotiations with men who controlled armies. Conversations where the wrong word could end careers or start wars. And I observed that the men who commanded the most genuine respect in those rooms were almost never the loudest or the most aggressive or the most visibly confident. They were the ones who were still, who listened more than they spoke, who did not fill every silence with reassurance or every uncertainty with noise. Composure in the context of attraction operates the same way. The man who remains still when she tests him, who does not become anxious when she pulls back, who does not amplify his pursuit when she creates distance, communicates something that very few men communicate. He communicates that he has a center that does not move when she moves, that his equilibrium is not dependent on her response, that he is, in the deepest sense, okay regardless of what she decides. And that communication, more than almost anything else, produces the response that pursuing men are desperately trying to produce and almost never achieve. It makes her want to move toward him. The fourth element is genuine interest. This one is subtle, and it is the one most often misunderstood. A man with virtù is genuinely interested in the people he encounters, not as a strategy, not as a technique for making them feel seen and therefore more attracted to him, as the natural expression of a mind that finds human beings genuinely interesting. There is a difference between performed interest and genuine interest that is immediately detectable. Performed interest asks questions and waits for the answer to use. Genuine interest asks questions and actually goes somewhere with what it hears. It makes connections. It offers something back that is not just validation but actual engagement with what has been said. She has been on the receiving end of performed interest many times. She knows what it feels like. It feels like being studied rather than being met. It feels like a technique rather than a connection. Genuine interest feels different. Feels like being seen. Like the person across from her is actually there, actually curious, actually changed in some small way by what she has said. That feeling is rare. And rarity, as we have established, produces desire. The fifth element is patience. A man with virtù does not rush. Not because he is indifferent to outcome. Because he understands that the outcomes worth having are not available on the timeline that anxiety prefers. I learned patience the hard way. In the service of Florence, I watched impatient men destroy in days what patient men had built across years. I watched alliances collapse because someone could not wait for the right moment. I watched campaigns fail because the general moved before the conditions were ready. Patience is not passivity. It is the discipline of a man who understands timing, who knows that the right action at the wrong moment produces a worse outcome than no action at all, who can hold his position, continue his work, maintain his direction, and wait for the moment when moving is actually the correct choice. In the context of attraction, patience communicates something precise. It communicates that he is not desperate, that the outcome of this particular interaction, however much it matters to him, does not determine whether he is okay, that he can afford to wait because he has something to do while he waits. That communication is the direct opposite of need, and it produces the direct opposite of the response that need produces. I want to address the men who are in situations right now where they feel they are losing ground, where they can see that she is being pursued by others and they are not sure how to respond, where the competition feels real and immediate and the instinct is to do something. Here is what I learned from watching Cesare Borgia navigate the most contested political landscape in Renaissance Italy. Borgia never scrambled. In situations where other men were visibly repositioning, pursuing, competing for position, Borgia held still. Not because he was passive, because he understood that scrambling communicates a specific thing. It communicates that the current situation is a threat to your position. And a man who can be threatened is a man with something to lose. And a man with something to lose has already communicated that his position is conditional. The man whose position is unconditional does not scramble. He continues. He holds his direction. He does not adjust his behavior in proportion to what others are doing because his behavior is not a response to others. It is an expression of himself. In practical terms, this means the following. When you become aware that other men are pursuing her, the worst thing you can do is increase the intensity of your own pursuit in proportion to theirs. This makes you a competitor. And competitors are people fighting over a resource. And people fighting over a resource have, by definition, made the resource more valuable than their own dignity. What you do instead is continue. You continue building what you are building. You continue being as interested in her as you genuinely are, no more and no less. You continue being as available as your genuine life allows, no more and no less. You continue being yourself, pointed at your direction, absorbed in your becoming. And you let the competition resolve itself. Because here is what I observed in Florence, in the Chancery, in every negotiation I ever conducted. The men who were most competed over were almost never the ones who competed hardest. They were the ones who seemed almost unaware that there was a competition. Because they were genuinely focused on something else. Because their direction was their own and the movements of others around them were peripheral rather than central. That quality of being genuinely centered in your own direction, genuinely indifferent to the competition not because you are performing indifference but because your attention is actually elsewhere, is one of the most compelling things a human being can project. It says without words that you are not defined by this, that you exist fully independent of how these resolves. That your life is already substantial and already moving and this is a welcome addition to it rather than the thing that makes it worth living. She is not choosing between you and the other men. She is choosing between the feeling of being near you and the feeling of being near them. And the feeling of being near a man who is genuinely full, genuinely directed, genuinely okay, is a completely different experience from the feeling of being near a man who needs something from her. Become the man whose presence feels like that. Everything else follows. There is something I must say directly about what I have described, because it is frequently misread in a particular way that produces its own set of problems. Everything I have described is not a strategy for winning a competition. It is a description of a state of being that makes the competition irrelevant. The difference is critical. A man who adopts these qualities as strategies, who performs direction he does not have, who manufactures composure he does not feel, who pretends to standards he does not hold, is not the man I am describing. He is the man in segment 4 of another conversation I had. The man performing depth rather than possessing it. The man whose presentation is slightly wrong in a way she cannot name but can absolutely feel. The man I am describing has done the actual work. He has spent years, not weeks, building something real inside himself. He has chosen a direction and pursued it with enough seriousness that it has genuinely reorganized his daily life. He has held his standards when holding them cost him something. He has cultivated composure not by suppressing feeling but by building the kind of interior stability that comes from knowing who you are and what you are building and why it matters. That man is not performing anything. He is simply being what he has built himself to be. And the qualities that make him compelling to her are the same qualities that make him effective in every other domain of his life. They are not context-specific. They are not techniques deployed in the presence of women and abandoned elsewhere. They are the expression of virtù. The full, formidable development of his particular nature into something that commands genuine respect without demanding it. This is the only version that works. Not because the performance is unconvincing enough to be detected. Because the performance, even when it is convincing in the short term, requires the man to be someone he is not. And a man who is performing himself cannot sustain it indefinitely. Eventually the performance cracks and what is underneath becomes visible. And what is underneath when the performance cracks is not the man he was pretending to be. It is the man he actually is. And if the man he actually is has not done the work, the crack is not recoverable. Build the real thing. It takes longer. It is less immediately satisfying than a technique that seems to work, but it is the only thing that holds. Now I want to give you the most important practical insight that all of this produces. The question most men are asking is, how do I make her choose me over every other man? The question they should be asking is, am I the kind of man that the woman I want would be right to choose? These are completely different questions. The first is about her. The second is about you. And the second is the only one you have any real power over. You cannot control what she wants. You cannot control how she weighs what she sees in you against what she sees in others. You cannot control the timing of her availability, the state of her prior experiences, the direction her life is moving, and whether it is moving toward or away from what you represent. What you can control is the quality of what you are when she encounters you. And the quality of what you are is a function of one thing and one thing only: what you have built. Have you built a direction that is genuinely yours, chosen through honest self-examination rather than borrowed from what you thought you were supposed to want? Have you built a set of standards that you hold regardless of the cost, so that when you say something matters to you it is legible as truth rather than performance? Have you built the composure that comes from having a center, from knowing who you are and what you are doing and why, so that pressure and uncertainty in the movements of others do not reorganize you? Have you built the genuine interest in other human beings that comes from having cultivated a rich enough interior life that other people's interiors are actually interesting to you? Have you built the patience that comes from having a long horizon, from understanding that the things worth having are built across years and that urgency is almost always the enemy of the outcomes you actually want? If the answer to these questions is yes, then you are already the man who does not need to win the competition. Because you are not competing. You are simply being the thing that the right person will recognize and move toward. If the answer is no, then the most honest and useful thing I can tell you is this: stop focusing on her. Start focusing on the building. Not as a tactic to seem less interested. As a genuine recognition that the work of becoming is the only work that produces the man she would be right to choose. And a man she would be right to choose is the only man whose being chosen means something. Machiavelli returned to Florence eventually, not in the way he had hoped. Not with his position restored or his service acknowledged or his counsel sought by the men who had tortured him and sent him away. He returned in his writing, in the ideas that outlasted the men who had broken him, in the principles that kept being true regardless of whether anyone in his lifetime recognized them as true. He had spent his exile becoming more fully what he had always been, not performing what he wished he were, not competing with the men who had taken his place, building, writing, thinking, developing the understanding that his years in the Chancery had begun and his years at Sant'Andrea in Percasino were completing. When the work finally arrived in the world, there was no competition. Not because no one else was writing. Because what he had built was so completely and specifically his that comparison was beside the point. That is the model. Not the man who wins the competition. The man who builds something so completely and specifically his own that the competition becomes beside the point. She will not choose you because you outperform the other men. She will choose you because what you are is so clearly and unmistakably itself that the choosing feels less like a decision and more like a recognition of something real, something built, something that was pointed at its own direction long before she arrived and will continue pointing there long after this chapter resolves, whatever way it resolves. Be that, not for her, for yourself first and entirely. And then, if fortune cooperates, for her as well. But build it regardless. Because a man who builds his virtue only in pursuit of a particular outcome has not built his virtue. He has built a performance. And performances end. The real thing does not end. It compounds. It deepens. It becomes more itself across time rather than less. And the man who has built the real thing does not wonder whether she will choose him. He is too busy being worth choosing. Go build.